Right now, we've got Aaron Morrison, the boss of Racing Victoria, in the studio, who is going to announce the financial results for 2024 and at the annual report, but would be a very happy man because the first official Spring Carnival, which is still ongoing, but Melbourne Cup Carnival in charge, and I don't think we've seen one better in many, many years. How are you, Aaron?
I agree. Very, very happy, Michael. Very positive. Victorian racing's really up and about at the moment, particularly with the mainstream audience that we were, seeking after. And it's been really well received, the carnival. We've had terrific racing, terrific events, engagement from a new demographic, particularly a younger one, who are really getting up and about for all the different aspects of the carnival. So really good so far. And as you say, not over yet. We've got some great racing to come all the way through to Christmas. We've got Caulfield this weekend, 2 Group 1 races. We've got the culmination of the Country Cups finals, 55 Country Cups. That should be another great race. And then, of course, Dunkeld, which I'm off to with the family. Should be sort of 8,000 or 9,000.
You got accommodation?
I do. I'm
you must have booked in early.
Staying with Chaz, actually, with Chaz Armitage on the farm, on the cattle farm.
Ah, very good.
Take the girls up there, so it'll be fantastic. Look forward to it.
Well, we spoke to Neil Wilson yesterday. Viewing figures, streaming figures, we had crowd numbers all up. We need to be able to parlay that now into trying to bring the revenue back because it's all about the bottom line, and that's the reason why you're in here today. So give us what that bottom line is for the annual report, which will be released a little later this afternoon.
Yeah, okay. Well, going back in time a bit, so we'll be announcing our results for the year ended 30 June 2024. So it feels like a fair while ago now, but probably indicative of where things are at overall. We'll report a statutory reported result, a deficit of about $12 million, but that includes a whole bunch of one-off costs that we incurred in relation to facilitating the Southside merger and some other legal costs. And if you strip those out and you look at the underlying business on a normalised basis, the deficit will be about $3 million, and that compares with an expected budget deficit of about 12 million. So we've done much better than we expected coming into the year. And you'll recall, we've been talking about this for a while, the wagering market's been in a decline, but more importantly for this particular year, we were going through a transition in relation to our industry funding arrangements. And, we expected the loss of some government funding that related to prize money support ahead of the changeover of the licence to the new arrangements. So taking that into account, we expected a deficit, and the board and the executive team, took a view that notwithstanding those challenges, we would try and maintain distributions to participants through prize money and industry investments, and we were able to do that. And then we were able to offset some of that deficit through some tight sort of cost control and a range of measures across the group. So that's the sort of highlight story. Wagering was down for the year about 10% turnover-wise. So we would end up at about 7.9 billion, which is down a bit from the peak, just over 9, but still sort of 14-15% above pre-COVID levels. So still healthy. It still puts us, we think, the number one wagering product in the country. But obviously the challenge at the moment is, wagering has softened, and that has continued into the first part of this financial year as well.
So just on that wagering turnover v revenue, if the turnover is actually more than what it was prior to COVID, what's the revenue prior to COVID compared to now?
Yeah, well, revenue's generally up or flat, right? It depends because there's been a change in the composition. So the turnover to revenue dynamic impacts on the income sources that RV generates directly from its own product, from race fields, right? But we also had a substantial proportion of our funding coming from the old joint venture, which was certainly in decline as pari-mutuel wagering and retail became less significant, and even Tabcorp lost some market share. We were seeing those funds on the decline, and what we did towards the end of that last year was we ended up locking in a fixed outcome to exit from the joint venture, which was a better outcome than if we were having to take that variable income. And we replaced that now with a new funding model, which gives us a combination of two things. One, a fixed amount of funding from the government for 10 years. There's a guaranteed amount that the government has pledged to give to the three codes of racing. And then on top of that, we're getting an increased share of the point of consumption tax that went from 10 to 15%. And in getting that, we get exposure to all forms of wagering, not just on racing product or our own product. Every racing product nationally, every type. That could be sports, could be betting on politics, all of those form part of the point of consumption tax base, and we get a share in that as a source of funding.
So 12 million deficit this year with those how much money was that you say was a one-off?
Yeah,
loss?
Take that down to 3, right? So
down to
3 is really the underlying deficit, and last year we were at a break even.
So what would your projections for next year be if, so we call it 3 million with those one-off costs, how will we get back to the black?
Yeah, and that's the challenge at the moment. So we're into this next financial year already, with wagering continuing to remain soft, which is our key source of income. And so the challenge for us is to try and offset that. And we've already pledged and promised that we would maintain prize money returns to participants, which is added around $316 million. It's more than half of our revenue just there. And so we've had a really good look, and we're continuing to have a really good look at our own operating cost base to find efficiencies there. And that will be a big part of the story. But we've also got to continue to focus on growing again, right? And really leveraging the assets at our disposal, including our media assets, to continue to grow Victorian thoroughbred racing, to take share in what might be a declining market from other states again.
So there's a lot of talk about the reduction in costs at head office. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some figures? How much have you reduced the spending by?
Yeah, in the last financial year, we took about $12 million out at a gross level, which sort of translated into about $7 million on a net basis after you factor back then expected cost inflation, wage inflation. A lot of our main expenditure is contracted, and so that's subject to indexation, and that sort of stuff is against you once you start the financial year. You've got to overcome that first, and then to make real savings, you've got to cut further or make further changes. And I was on record as saying that we're looking at a further $10 million net savings again this year. So it's a fair challenge ahead. That'll come from a combination of things, just reviewing different parts of the business. It will mean we need to be clear about the scope of services that we perform. We'll need to look at program, at how races are performing, the profitability of those. I mean, everything's on the table. The media businesses, I've discussed the review that we're undertaking there, and we're looking at how we can make those businesses more efficient going forwards and how we actually get more value out of them at the same time. So that's not just about cost cutting. For me, it's actually more about getting a better outcome from the assets that we've created. We've created this great big engine that does a great job, you guys included, of covering race day and talking about wagering primarily. But I'd also like to think we can leverage that big engine to talk more about the sport to a broader mainstream audience. And, we need to be working with partners to spread the message far and wide. And so partnering with the likes of Channel 7, Channel 9, who did a fantastic job over the 4 days, punters, News Corp, people that we might have thought might be competitors at one point in time. We actually want to work with them and get Victorian racing, the message of Victorian racing out there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergies which can help with the cost reduction, especially in that media arm that you talk about. And the growth,
yeah.
And the growth that you talk about. I suppose the other area too is, you mentioned you're going to be looking at programming. Does that mean there could be, and this is a debate we've had for many years, days where it's a loss leader? You race on a Monday and it actually costs you money to put the races on. Do you look at the potential of having fewer races and race meetings?
Yeah, I think we'll need to. That might be one of the outcomes, but we certainly look at the program and the profitability that it generates, and there'll always be a proportion of the races that are returning less than others. That's actually part of the conversation I'm having with the Trainers Association, again, in respect of whether we can create some opportunities going forwards to have days off, and I know we've been there before, but we're happy to go back and have that conversation again if there's support. So we'll sit down and share some of that information and work through something with Robbie and the team over the coming months as we start to look at the programming for next year. But all those things have to be on the table. And then, ideally, if you make any changes and savings, you want to be reinvesting that back into continuing to grow the industry. And let's reinvest it into the races which are of historical significance for Victoria that set us apart. That are part of the primacy of Victorian racing. Let's invest and build those up. It's a very competitive marketplace for racing, as you know, at the moment nationally.
It certainly is, and you've made the pledge not to reduce prize money levels, but how do we try to increase the prize money? Because, as you say, there is the pressure from New South Wales, who have increased prize money, and they throw a hell of a lot of money into major races to try and pull jockeys away during the Spring Carnival especially.
Yep, well, I think it's going to require a team effort. Classic team effort, right? So RV can do what it can do, and it's got some constraints under its business model. But we've then also got to start thinking about what some of our partners can contribute. The wagering operators do a terrific job investing in races, and there's perhaps some more potential for that, and clubs also topping up some of their races as well. So all of those things need to be part of the consideration set going forwards.
And what about those clubs as well, in regards to, are there clubs that are doubling or tripling down on the same roles, which you could reduce costs on?
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of mouths to feed in racing, in Victoria in particular, right? And probably increasingly scarce funds coming in, so that's got to be part of any conversation going forwards as well. I don't think we have any explicit agenda, but what I would say is that, with some new faces around the tables at CEO, chair level, in Clubland here as well, there have already been some interesting conversations about how clubs can work more closely together across a range of different aspects. I think the Moonee Valley relocation will be an interesting opportunity as well, right? So Moonee Valley's already out there now thinking about what it does to relocate its races, and is talking to other clubs about how they might work together, who might provide what services to manage those. And if you could get an outcome on something like that, why wouldn't you continue that theory on going forward?
So you see a possible scenario in the not too distant future where instead of each individual club having marketing arms, sales arms, membership, where it comes under one centralised sort of management?
Well, that might be some time away. Let's be realistic. We've sort of been trying to push some of those aspects for a while. I think it'll take a little bit of time, but I think at the moment there's goodwill to at least work more closely together and find out what some of those opportunities are. Marketing, there's opportunities there around shared marketing, research. There's opportunities around some of the operational aspects. There's opportunities around, race day, catering, events, all sorts of things like that. Back of house opportunities. There's plenty there. We just probably need the opportunity to sit down and also the goodwill and support from the clubs, which I'm feeling is there at the moment with the new faces around the table. Just
on Moonee Valley and the redevelopment, where's the Cox Plate going to be run? Where would you like it to be run in a couple of years?
At one of our premium tracks, right? So
a metropolitan track.
At a metropolitan track, yeah, and we've made that pretty clear to Moonee Valley. So the process is that the Moonee Valley are out there talking to other venues about how they might host the Moonee Valley relocated races, not just the Cox Plate, but all of the races in the calendar. And it's likely that they'll end up doing some arrangements with other clubs that spread those races across different tracks. And I understand those conversations have been parked temporarily during the Spring Carnival, but they'll be picked up in earnest in the coming weeks. And I think Moonee Valley have said that they'd like to wrap that up sometime prior to Christmas. That would be their part of the conversation, and then they'd come to Racing Victoria with their preference, and then we need to consider the club's preferences and the outcomes that they're trying to deliver as against what's in the best interest of the industry from wagering turnover, from an attendance perspective, from an engagement perspective as well. And so, ideally we can wrap all of that up in the early part of next calendar year.
Do you have final say, or Moonee Valley?
We will have final say. Moonee Valley, we've given them the opportunity to go out and come up with arrangements that work for the club, but they know that it needs to also work for the industry as well.
A couple of SMSs coming through. This is an interesting one, just on costings and I suppose paying for itself. Can you ask Aaron, does jumps racing pay for itself or run at a loss?
It's subsidised, jumps racing, yep, and it comes at a cost that is a little bit more than flat racing, and obviously the returns from a wagering perspective are different between jumps and flat racing. So that's one of the things that we would need to consider as part of the
so how much would
very
it lose
holistic
in
review.
a season?
I'm not prepared to go into the details on that at the moment, but that is something that we need to look at as part of the broader review.
And how is that review going? Obviously, it was an unfortunate end of the jump season, a number of fatalities that you've been on record, or Racing Victoria has been on record of saying is not acceptable, not sustainable. So where's that review at for jumps racing?
Yeah, well progressed. We had submissions closed, I think, a week or two ago almost now. I think we got about 380 submissions, which is not a really big number. We might have had more, we thought, but a number of good submissions from a cross-section of different people. We've got a jumps review group that was convened, led by Jamie Steer. They're reporting through a formal structure that includes the RIC, the Racing Integrity Commissioner, reviewing the terms of reference and the process, and that whole review looks at a broad range of things, from the financial side of it through to the safety, the welfare side of things, the operational side of things. The review recommendation should be finalised by the end of November from that group. Then they come to me and to the executive, and then we take that to the RV board in December for a final recommendation.
Is there a chance jumps racing could be on its last legs?
Well, I think there's a chance that things need to change based on how we ended the jump season last. Right? I think I've said this before, that there's no scenario under which there's no change as a consequence of that, but where it goes, it's still to be determined. It's a genuinely open process, and we're considering a range of views.
One of the positives that's come out of the Spring Carnival is it was fatality-free, especially the Melbourne Cup.
Yes.
Injury-free as well. Been a lot of discussion about the veterinary protocols. You're happy with how they sit at the moment? Obviously, you've got the end result, which is what everyone wants.
Yep.
The process and the build-up, how do you view it?
Yeah, well, I think the facts would say that they've been successful 4 years in a row where we've had no incident or fatality, having had such a terrible outcome prior to 2021. And I think that's been really important in terms of racing's sort of appeal. And we spoke before about racing being up and about and popular again in the mainstream, and I think that's a major contributor. It's so important from a social licence perspective. It's given people permission socially to engage, and it's probably taken away the sting from the naysayers who are trying to doubt us. So the protocols are working. This is my first year in the role, and I've had a number of conversations with stakeholders already, and I will continue to do so over the coming weeks in the wash-up. And just as we do every year, we continue to review whether the protocols remain appropriate and whether there's improvements that can be made. I would say the sentiment that I'm getting is there's no disagreement about the need for protocols, why we put them in place, but perhaps the conversation is more about how we are managing them and how we are communicating the level of transparency around the process, and also whether we can continue to do better with emerging technology and those kinds of tweaks, and they're all part of the conversation going forwards. But come back to it, they're working, they've been successful, and they're tremendously important from a broader societal perspective.
And just as I started the conversation, what's the best way to leverage what seems to be almost a renewed, wider society embrace of racing, and especially the Spring Carnival. How can we turn that into the bottom line going up?
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of our media assets and how we market and promote the sport, right? Beyond the racing wagering experience, how do we sort of turn an always-on approach to promoting the industry and continue to talk about the heroes of the sport? So one of the best things that this Spring Carnival has given us is some incredible narratives with a mainstream audience. You know, the Robbie Dolan story, absolute fairy tale, jockey turned singer turned jockey, wins the Melbourne Cup at his first try, you know, someone that's known to a massive audience. The Harry Coffey story as well. These are the sorts of stories we want to continue to leverage. But equally, you've seen young kids, you know, standing trackside with big J-Mac signs and cheering him on to break the record. And, you know, you're starting to see the real heroes of the sport emerge, and we can do a lot more to profile them and promote them. And then there's the heroes of the people out in country land, you know, profiling the volunteers and the contributions that people are making to their local communities is just as important. So we've got an opportunity to do much better at all of that, and that's how we want to sort of focus our media assets to tell some of those stories beyond the great race day coverage that we already do.
A couple of quick ones. The pattern. Where are we at with that situation and Racing Australia?
Yeah, it's a complicated one, but there's movement. So I've certainly taken on board a lot of feedback and spoken to a lot of stakeholders over the past couple of weeks and months about the potential new guidelines. And it's been well reported that the guidelines have not yet received international endorsement from the Asian Patent Committee or the likes of ERPAC or CETA. And until such time as there's a resolution of some issues that the Asian Patent Committee had raised with Racing Australia, that won't be forthcoming. And so there's a focus within Racing Australia to make some changes and work with the Asian Patent Committee to get it comfortable with the guidelines directionally.
Are all stakeholders keen to make those changes?
I would say most of them would be supported by stakeholders, right? And so that's the Racing Australia track. And then separately, you know, we've been discussing some potential alternative arrangements with some other stakeholders, with the likes of breeders and others that want to support breeders who are proposing that there could be an independent patent committee that could sit outside of RA and the PRAs. And that's great. You know, it's good. If there's a solution there that works, then we're certainly open to exploring that. And what that might be able to do is help us overcome some of the competition law issues that are challenging Racing Australia and the PRAs, where they sit in control of black type and the patent, but they're limited by the competition law issues, and they're limited in terms of what they can and can't do. Is there an opportunity to have someone potentially independent off to the side that can help overcome some of those issues? So we're looking at that.
Would everyone support that, or would Racing New South Wales support that? The two biggest are Racing New South Wales and Victoria. Would Victoria and New South Wales be on board with that?
I'd certainly say Racing Victoria would be. I can't speak for New South Wales, but I can say that those conversations are happening, right? So there's genuine good dialogue happening to look at those options. And then there's obviously stuff that's being progressed through Racing Australia as well. So dual track sort of stuff. Yeah.
The other big one at the moment, and I know you're going to go soon, is what's going on with the federal government review of the wagering. It seems to have gone very quiet. We know there's a federal election coming up early in the new year. So when's this going to get announced?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of certainty around it, and we're continuing to be told it's still going to be this year. That's the intent, and the government did schedule a couple of extra sitting weeks for Parliament to get through a few things. We're not hearing anything different from, you know, what we've last updated on. We're still encouraged to hear the Prime Minister and the responsible ministers talk about the differentiation of racing from other sports and racing broadcast and media context being different from other broadcast contexts. And I think we would be confident that we'll see some kind of carve out for racing and racing assets, which is great. What looks a little bit more challenging, though, is the social media and digital side of things and what can and can't be done there. And that's sort of against the backdrop of the federal government having a major focus at the moment nationally, forget wagering and the like, just as a national social issue for this government that they have it as part of their strong platform going forwards, to put restrictions around social media. You wouldn't expect it could be any different for
16 and under are going to be blackballed from Instagram and social media. So, there would be concerns in regards to what they do in that space, I can imagine. Yeah,
and so the wagering operators will need to work through the implications for that, and we'll work closely with them to understand the implications as well. But priority at the moment is making sure that racing is differentiated and looked after. And I think the government appreciates the significance of the racing industry nationally and how and why it is different.
Last one. Annual report comes down. It's a deficit as we were expecting. But are the green shoots looking ahead? Are you confident about the future and the near future in the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, I think you have to be confident and positive coming out of the last couple of months that we've seen, right? It's fantastic to see racing is popular again in the mainstream. It's a tremendous opportunity and gift that we've been provided with that we've got to leverage going forwards. And I think, that's what we intend to do. That's where the green shoots will be. We've got a whole generation of younger people mainly coming through that seem to be embracing racing again, want to go out and have fun. The rite of passage again, they're turning 17, 18. I've got young girls who are in that sort of demographic, and they're all looking forward to going to the races with their friends again, just as you and I did when we were that age, and it's fantastic to see.
Absolutely. I should have asked you this before. John Kanga, when I spoke to him during the Caulfield Cup Carnival, he said he wants to move this 1,000 guineas Rupert Clark back to the old pattern. Is that something that you're willing to look at? Or
I've heard him say that. I haven't spoken to him about it, and at this stage, we haven't had any plans to do that. Well, let's see how this weekend goes. I think last year, from a metrics perspective, it was very successful. Right, you come out of the peak spring period, out of the peak Melbourne Cup Carnival, you finish with such an incredible Champions Day, and then in the past you sort of went to a secondary track, and from a engagement and wagering turnover perspective, and no disrespect to any of the tracks that hosted those meetings prior, but you were almost literally halving your outcomes. And then what we saw with the 1,000 guineas was wagering turnover was probably 20-25% above those levels. And let's see how we go again this weekend. We've got 2 quality Group 1s. We've got a couple of Group 3s that are great races. We've got the Country Cups finale. And then, we'll assess all of that. And if John wants to talk about that, I'm, open-minded to having the conversation. But hopefully the statistics will show another positive outcome.
Aaron, appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me again. Good luck for the rest of the carnival. Yeah. Make sure everyone continues to head along. We've got plenty of country cups over the next couple of weeks, in addition to the Caulfield meeting this weekend. And of course, we then head into Southside, into the Meteorite and the Supernova and the likes of the Jericho Cup. So keep heading along for fantastic racing. We might get you on once more before we break for Christmas, because that will be at the end of the entire carnival, and we can have a talk about how it's progressed all the way through. Appreciate your time. Thanks again. See Aaron Morrison, CEO Racing Victoria.